Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo. I'm very excited on the show. We have Joana Inch. Joana is the co-founder and head of digital at Hat Media. So thanks so much for being on the show, Joana.
Thank you. So happy to be on it.
Absolutely. Now, we've known each other for a while, and I know you as an expert in B2B and SaaS.
You're
Particularly
too
when it
kind.
particularly when it comes to lead and revenue generation. So that's what we'll really focus today's conversation is really finding out, based on your experience, what's working in the field of SaaS when it comes to lead generation, what's not working, which I'm sure there has to be a thing or two. So first off, you work with a lot of different SaaS companies in Australia and around the region. So what are some of the
Yep,
things that you've seen are working well in terms of lead generation for those firms?
absolutely. So I think a lot of people probably would have heard this, but I'm just going to emphasize on it once again because you just see such a massive difference when the use of video. And video, not just explainer videos, which I know SaaS love to do, or how-to videos of the product or demo videos. It's actually, we love getting the founders of these SaaS companies and asking them all sorts of questions about how did you get started, what is your passion, what drives you. But also we look at obviously the content strategy around your target audience and what are they asking, what do they want to know, because it's not about your features, it's not about your product, it's about solving their pain points, and solving their inner problems as well. So the problems that keep them up at night, the problems that your software or your SaaS can solve, by just kind of talking about it in a different way through video and through interview style video as well. So we use that in our LinkedIn advertising, and we see much better results in terms of lead gen. We
Mm.
use it in our email nurture flows, and we see much higher engagement rates and conversion rates. And we use, for example, in webinars as well, as opposed to just having a standard ebook or guide, which I think people are now bored of. So it's good to have some video content for them to watch while having a cup of coffee or just their lunch, rather than downloading your standard 20 to 30 page ebook. So that's definitely something that has worked incredibly well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and it's much easier, obviously, to digest video content versus text. It's a lot of it is passive, but also it gives you a sense in terms of the other person's personality. So, for example, even we have never met in person because I'm in Singapore and you're in Australia, but
Yeah.
we've had many chats via Zoom and interviews and stuff like that. So I get a sense of who you are, kind of your personality, and I feel closer to you, if that makes sense, for video than I would maybe of a texting. So I think it's another advantage of video that a lot of people forget about. Also, it's a little bit harder to do video because most people don't feel comfortable putting themselves on a video. So you have a slight advantage versus most people who are doing text-based content.
Absolutely. It's so much more memorable, and it really breaks down those barriers. So your customers get to learn about you as a person because they don't want to buy from a brand, they want to buy from a person. Now, it's actually quite challenging getting these, highly tech people that have coded this brilliant SaaS and telling them, can you come on camera and we're going to film you and you're going to answer all these questions. And they're actually really nervous. So it is quite a process trying to get them to be comfortable, but it just comes across, their passion always comes across, their knowledge always comes across, and I think that's why it works incredibly well.
No, I think that's a very good point. And you mentioned it's been working very well in terms of your LinkedIn ads and some of your nurturing. Are you able to share a bit more in terms of some of the things that have worked? I don't want to give away the whole kind of thing because they
Yeah.
can reach out to you directly for those services, but anything in particular, any examples that you found interesting in terms of your experiments?
Absolutely. So, not just video alone, but combining that with an ABM strategy, so account based marketing. And actually, you and me had a collaboration on one specific client. I can't mention their name, but the results were just amazing. I mean, through hyper personalization and using ABM techniques, what we managed to achieve is we took a pipeline that takes roughly about 6 to 12 months. and we turned it into 3 to 4 months. We managed to land some really great accounts in just 3 to 4 months, and it was just unbelievable. And I think we did it because we just flipped the funnel upside down pretty much. But, rather than targeting a wide audience and then trying to convert them, we got really targeted. And I know, Joe, you showed me some really cool ways on kind of finding the right people and ways to, I suppose, get information about them to create really hyper personalized content. And that has been brilliant. It's been a game changer, absolutely.
Wow. Well, I wasn't expecting that. So that's really, really great news to hear that it has been working out. I think I'm always heartened to hear you sharing kind of the results. And it was interesting to hear kind of the shortening the sales cycle and landing some of those new accounts. I think it goes back to just my approach to building relationships, whether it's B2C or B2B. At the end of the day, you're selling to another person. And I think that's where account-based marketing comes in quite handy, because once again, you're not trying to go for everyone under the sun. You're going after specific accounts, specific people, and niching down. I think that was something interesting in our experiment together that worked out quite well. And I've seen this work out for other clients, is niching down, because at the end of the day, you could sell to anyone and everyone under the sun. But if it's not going to, resonate with them, if they're not going to find it helpful to their business, you're just wasting your time in terms of your advertising and even your outreach. So I know we went after a specific kind of industries. And I think that's something that you really, really do an exceptional job at. So I think in terms of the planning and structuring, honestly, I've never seen someone who is more structured in terms of their planning. Like, what does the campaigns look like? What are the personas? I mean, I was just on a call about 15 minutes ago, and we talking about, the strategy and the planning and how important it is. But I've never worked with someone who is crystal clear in terms of the planning as you have been. And I think that honestly made the biggest difference. I came in and probably added a little bit of spice, but I think it was your structuring and planning that really made the big difference.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think getting the foundations right is really important because, whatever kind of content you create, whatever marketing, advertising you create, it really has to go back to, well, who is this person that you're targeting? And if you know everything you can about them, the rest becomes really easy and it just works. But if you're you can experiment with content, but I think you should really know who your buyer persona is and your niche is. I think that's really crucial.
I couldn't agree more. I think I wrote a post about this recently, talking about the who, the what, and the why. So I mentioned that marketing is super easy. What's really, really tough is figuring out who is your target audience, which I think most people struggle with.
Yeah.
What do you actually
You'd be
offer?
surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Second is, what do you actually offer? Because in your mind, it's very clear, but articulating that to, an audience is really tough. And third is, why should they buy it? There's so many options on the market, whether you're a consultancy or you sell insurance, whatever it is, there's so many options on the market nowadays. So why should they buy you versus the competitors? I think once you have that nailed down, it's far easier. But I think going back to, when you talked about the who. So I'd love to hear from your point of view, how do you help clients really identify who their personas are and flesh those out?
Yeah. Well, one thing we do is, obviously a buyer persona workshop, and we have a list of questions that we ask them. We also, I think, really important, because I know when a lot of kind of consultants and agencies do this, they really just speak to the founder or the head of marketing person. But actually, you should talk to a team member from the other regions as well, like mainly the ones that specifically talk to clients, like someone from service, salespeople. Get the whole team involved, because they always give you more information than what the founders and the marketing people actually know. So you really drill down into their pain points and the questions that they're asking, every single day. So just by knowing what those are, you can then cater to them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think those are two departments I always recommend clients as well, is sales and customer service, for a couple of different reasons. First, they're on the front line, so they are the ones dealing with the customers on a regular basis. And secondly, they're very blunt. I think where marketers try to be a bit soft in terms of fluffy, in terms of their communications, salespeople, there's no BS. They tell you exactly, oh, they didn't buy from me because of this, or they bought from me because of X, Y reason. Same with customer service. There's no fluff there. They get straight to it. So those are great antidotes in terms of building your personas.
Absolutely, get the whole team involved, and yeah, there's a list of questions I think that really help out. I actually have a whole chapter in my latest book dedicated just to nailing that niche, and it's got a list of questions in there. So happy to share them with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we're happy to link to it as well, so the folks can check out your book. I'm sure it's a really good read. And something else I'd love to get your thoughts on is in terms of quantity, because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with is putting together personas, putting together too many personas. So what is your, thoughts on finding the right amount of personas?
Yeah, and we've been there before. I mean, for one specific client, I think we had to create like 6 or 8 personas, and in the end, we only ended up targeting, the 3 that were on that list, and we had really good success with those 3. So any kind of marketing that we did for the other ones, I almost felt like it was wasted time and wasted effort.
Mm,
I don't think you need that many. I think you need one, the primary persona, which is the decision maker,
mm-hmm,
and then you need the 2 influencers. So who does this person talk to? So in my line of work, we work with a lot of technology and SaaS clients. So usually we're targeting, the CIO or the CTO or even the CEO.
mm-hmm,
But those guys, yes, they sign off at the end of the day, but they're not the ones doing research and checking out every bit of software to use that could improve their day to day. They're speaking to other people in other roles, such as head of IT or the IT manager.
mm-hmm.
So we look at who are their influencers and who do they speak to, and that's it. That's all you need to target. Just primary and the 2 influencers.
Okay, the primary and the 2 influencers. I guess the question is how do you identify who those influencers are?
Through a lot of stalking and research via LinkedIn and just company research, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Um,
usually the client can identify that as well. Someone that's been in business for a while, they kind of get the hang of that, and they can help us out in that department.
Absolutely. I think that's a good step in terms of identifying the personas. The next, I guess, is moving outwards. One thing that we are focusing on is, the industries and the type of companies you target. Going back to that ABM approach we were talking. So once again, how do you put together that list? Because that's a common question I always get when people are doing ABM.
Yeah. Usually, once again, so with this specific client that you and I worked on together, it was very much talking to the founders and also, the consultants within that company, and kind of identifying, okay, you've done work with so many companies, but where have your biggest success stories come from? So where has you seen the most amount of success? And I think you'll find they've worked with many different industries and regions. However, they tend to kind of have more success and also more passion for some specific ones. So I
Mm,
think if they have the passion and they have the success to kind of prove results, that's really the industry that they should focus on. That's where they're going to get the most amount of success and be able to truly scale, because they can prove results and they also love working in that industry. So naturally, they're going to achieve good results.
absolutely. I think once again, I was just talking about this is the advantages of case studies and showcasing what you've done. I think also it's very easy to showcase a competitor or a similar player in the field and say, okay, we've done work for X, Y, and Z versus not another kind of completely different industry. And I think that familiarity can be powerful. And I think it's something we saw in our work as well, that focusing on specific industries and then going in there and saying, okay, what anecdotes or what case studies or what proof points do we have to substantiate that? And weaving that into the communications, I think worked out quite well on multiple channels, really.
Exactly. I mean, one question when I first started out in the digital marketing world was trying to get clients. I always used to get asked, "Oh, but do you have any success in my industry or like my specific area?" And I'd be like, "Oh, no, but I have, in these areas," and they were just completely uninterested. So I found that not just for myself, but for clients, by picking a specific industry and just really nailing that industry and being, the best that you can be in that industry, is what really helps you. Achieve your greatest results, and it's much easier to pick up clients then from that industry as well, because they can see your results.
I think you're absolutely right. And just to kind of even on the thought leadership kind of point of view, even the podcast we do, I always try to include a similar type of role or similar type of industry for people I'm saying inviting into the podcast, because I think that they can, it comes more real to them versus, a completely different persona, a completely different industry. They're like, oh, that's nice, but I don't get it.
Yeah.
So I think it helps in so many different reasons, that familiarity in terms of getting their attention and then making them take some kind of
Mm.
action.
Absolutely. Because if you create something more generic, yes, you might have more people kind of listening to it, but they're not going to remember it. They're not going to kind of react to it in the way that you want them to. Whereas when you
Mm.
really drill down and get hyper personalized with your content, which is what we did,
Yeah.
yeah, you just make such a huge impact. And yeah, it really works.
Absolutely. And one other thing I want to get your thoughts on is around marketing and sales alignment when it comes to ABM strategies like this, because this is a question I got from a senior marketer recently. Is saying, okay, how do you
Mm.
make sure you align both departments? Because ABM is really a joint effort. It's not really. It's a bit, you know, it's a bit confusing because it's not really marketing per se. It really relies on both the sales team. And I think you and I kind of discovered that on. You need both of those people to play together. So what are some recommendations or tips to making sure you have clear alignment and they're working together towards ABM strategy?
Yeah, yeah. Look, that is that is definitely a challenge for a lot of companies. I think historically we've struggled with this in the past. We've done amazing results for marketing, but then it doesn't kind of translate to sales, and you're always kind of left wondering why. So I think software, like your technology, your tech stack really makes a difference. So if
Mm,
you have a software, such as HubSpot, that truly aligns marketing and sales or in the same platform and provides constant reporting around that, that really helps.
mm,
Um, a lot of my clients, I actually, when I have weekly meetings with them, I don't just speak to the marketing teams anymore. I also get the sales guys to join
mm,
because, and when we talk about everything, we talk about the whole funnel, how people are traveling down it, what is sales struggling with that we can then tell marketing, to fix or do more of. So I think just communication number one needs to be there, but two, look at your technology, because you'd be surprised how many companies I've come across where marketing is using one software, sales is using a different
mm.
software, and they're not talking to each other. So there's no data on, okay, yes, we got all these leads coming through, but what actually happened to them at the bottom of the funnel? So those would be my two tips. Lots of communication and get your technology straight.
I think those are really, really good tips. I think one more that I would add on to it, just from our experience working together, is just showcasing the wins and kind of the sharing the quality of the leads that come through, because I think that salespeople at the end of the day are very busy with putting together pitch decks and following up with prospects. But if it's one of those things where you say, okay, I have a lead in this target account that you've been trying to get to, or this, we've reached out to this target person you've been trying to get in touch with, then the light bulb goes off and they say, okay, I'll make time for that. Because that's another big challenge, I think, a lot of organizations face, is how do you get the salespeople time? Because they're so used to it, the grind of the sales work, that they don't really, if marketing gives them something to share, or a lead to follow up with, there's occasionally that, okay, that's nice, but I'll get to it when I get to it. And as a result, I mean, there's statistics that show kind of the speed of follow up. So the faster you can follow up with a prospect, the higher your chances are of converting. And I think that's always a big challenge, is speed. But I think it's really the marketing department's job to convey that and say, look, here are some of the priority accounts that you've been trying to get in touch with. Here's some of the people that we have reached out to. And so just making it very clear in terms of the value you're bringing to the table. Otherwise, it's very easy for them to switch off.
Absolutely. I think also I'll also add, I just remembered just a little story that with one particular client, we really get the sales guys involved in our content marketing strategy as well, because they speak to these clients and they get inundated with questions like, oh, what about the security around this software? Or what about my industry, like the sport industry, for example, was one specific case I can think of. So they give us this feedback and they're like, do you know what would really help if I've already touched base so many times. I don't want to keep annoying this client. However, they have had these questions and concerns around these topics. Can you create content around that specifically that I can then have a reason to get back in touch with them and add value to them? So that's been really helpful. So marketing would then take that feedback, create that content, give it back. They can then, obviously have more leverage with that specific prospect to turn it into a sale.
That's a beautiful example, and I think it's another reason why for me content marketing is a bit of a misleading term, because for me it's more a sales enablement. I think in that example you just mentioned, it's very much providing the content that the team needs to go out there and not only
Yeah.
attract the right people but also go out there and convert, because you can have great content marketing but going back to what you're saying, it doesn't convert. And if that's the case, then it's nice. We can pat ourselves on the back as marketers, but if it's not driving any revenue for the company, then marketing team is going to be downgraded in terms of their status within the organization. So I think that's another good tip that you just brought up.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't just focus on engagement. I think, yeah, at the end of the day, conversion rates are important.
Yeah, and I think it's the same for any SaaS companies. The founders are going to look for, okay, what kind of revenue or what kind of money have we brought in, and what has marketing contributed. I'm sure you you get that quite a lot in your field, and I think founders particularly they scrutinize marketing probably more than most industries would.
Yeah, you could say that. Definitely. Just thinking of some more examples coming to the technology as well. So, one thing we discovered with one specific client, this was a couple of years ago now, but was the kind of platforms that were delivering them leads. So before we came in, they were running a lot of Facebook ads, for example, and it was a B2B market. So it was quite strange that, Facebook was their main kind of platform of choice.
Mm.
And the reason for that was marketing was saying, oh no, these are the cheapest leads. Facebook gets us the cheapest leads and the most leads. But then when we connected everything, once again, comes back to connection and actually looking at the data, we found that, well, yes, Facebook does get you the most leads for like the smallest amount of money. But
Yeah.
if you look at the ones that have converted and the ones that have generated the most amount of revenue, they're actually coming from LinkedIn. And
Mm.
yes, LinkedIn is your most expensive lead, but it's actually your cheapest customer. So I think data is really important for marketing, and I think sales needs to give them that data. But also, like I said, if the technologies talk to each other, then they can then analyze that themselves.
Yes. Question. So I think that's a really good point, because going back to what we were just saying, a lot of times people see Facebook and they say, "Oh, we've gotten this many leads," but then no one converts. So is it really an effective channel? And I think by that metrics, by that standards, it's not necessarily the case. So I think yes, LinkedIn in many cases, although the cost per lead is higher, the cost per customer, which is the real kind of metric you're looking at, is actually lower than other metrics. So I think figuring out
Yeah.
the right metrics and evaluating it effectively is going to a key part of marketing optimization. I think it's a really good point you brought up.
Thank you. I still think Facebook does have its place in B2B marketing. I just think it's probably to finding your niche and your target audience on LinkedIn, but then
Mm.
remarketing to them on Facebook, because it's cheaper, but you're also getting them in their downtime and just on a second touch point. So it is an effective remarketing strategy, just not one to find a good quality B2B audience, in my experience.
That's a really good point of finding the audience first on LinkedIn and remarketing them on Facebook. I think it's a very good strategy for anyone listening. I'd also love to get your thoughts on what hasn't been working, and I don't want to talk about your clients, but maybe just stories you've heard in the SaaS industry. What are some of the tactics or strategies that just haven't been working lately?
Yeah. Um, I think I would have to say when it comes to LinkedIn messages, That's something we've experimented with it as well, but I just don't, the amount that I personally get inundated with, it's astonishing. And it's the problem is they're very, very generic salesy messages. So these people, they connect with the target audience on LinkedIn, and then rather than try and build, a relationship and start a conversation, they try and sell to you straight away.
Yeah.
So I know that that doesn't work. It's not a numbers game. It really just doesn't work. So that's one thing I think I see a lot of people doing it. And I'd say, look, wasted time, wasted effort, focus on something else.
I gotta agree with you. I think a lot of salespeople are doing it because it's the easiest way. You can automate it, so you can send out, hundreds of messages a day if you wanted to. But the
Yeah.
problem with that is, once again, it's so generic. It's obviously, for most people, it's a spam. So it's as good as getting a spam email. And I think LinkedIn, the direct messages can be a powerful way, but I think it's the way you approach it. And if you use it as a sales channel, then yes, you're going to lose. If you're using it as an opportunity to build a relationship, find out more about that person, and this is something I
Mm.
talk about in the social selling world. If you're using social to sell, once again, why I don't like the term social selling, I don't like a lot of the common words, but why I don't like the word social selling is because you're not really selling on social. You, if anything, should be selling offline, or via a private Zoom session like this. You're not actually selling anything. So anytime
Mm.
someone gets a whiff of you trying to sell them something on social, it just goes against every grain, in them, and they're just going to be like block. Or the worst is, I see a lot of people screenshotting those spam messages and then sharing on their network, which is obviously going to have a terrible impact on your overall reputation. So it's a big no-no for me. I wish less people would do it, but it's still the norm for many salespeople who are just looking for that, get rich quick approach. But
Yeah.
it doesn't work. I don't know why people think that those spamming messages work. They never work. And I've run experiments with different industries, finance, tech, same thing. People doing it versus
Mm.
a different way, and it's like, why are we doing that to begin with? I don't know.
No, exactly. I think maybe, because historically, if you look at the data, LinkedIn messages compared to email would get 300% higher response rate. So
Mm.
I think the fact that someone was responding back to them, whether it be a yes or no or a question, at least it started the conversation. But and people are kind of more accustomed to feeling like they had to respond through social because someone was reaching out to them personally, whereas with an email, everyone's used to just ignoring that. But now I think that's flipped, and everyone's very much accustomed to ignoring, generic LinkedIn messages as well. I still think they have a place to play in the funnel. I just don't think it's at the top of the funnel. I think it's somewhere in the middle or the bottom of funnel. So the way I use it, for example, in my campaigns is if we're promoting a webinar or an ebook or a guide at the top of the funnel, and somebody downloads that or watches the webinar, we would do a reach out through LinkedIn just to say, hey, just connect, thank you, and just wanting to get your takeaways on that asset. And simple as that. It's just a conversation starter. And then it's, you've made that connection, and part of your network on LinkedIn.
That's a really good point in terms of, I hadn't thought about that in terms of the funnel. It's absolutely not anything that should be towards the top of the funnel. If that's how they find out about you, your chances are you're probably going to fail. But going back to what you were saying, if you have it in the middle or bottom of the funnel where they've already engaged with your content, they've attended a webinar, they downloaded a white paper, and then someone reaches out to them, not in a sales way as you just mentioned, but in a way where, hey, thanks so much, appreciate it. If you have any, if you have any key takeaways you want to share with us, great. Otherwise, thanks so much. Um,
Yeah.
it's just common courtesy. I don't know. For me, it's the way I would communicate with someone in person, but for some reason, people communicate very differently than they would online versus offline. Like you would never go up to someone at a networking event and saying, "Oh, hi, I'm Joana. This is what I like." No, it's like you would never do that. You would never do that. But for some reason, they feel compelled to do that online. It's quite funny.
It's because they're hiding behind the keyboard, so they feel like it's safer to. But no, it's you definitely have to treat it like you're meeting this person. Um, you know, I usually relate these kind of things to a first date as well, like marketing automation, for example. If you want to collect contact details from someone because they're downloading something from you,
Yeah.
uh, 4 fields maximum. That's it. Just ask name, email if you can, and nurture them obviously to get more information. Because you wouldn't ask a million questions on a first date. You have to do the courting and just treat it like a relationship. Like you want to grow this relationship rather than a numbers game.
I think that's a brilliant, brilliant funny. And I used to make that analogy as well, because for me, going back to the example we were sharing, when salespeople direct message, they just spam people. That's like getting down and proposing to someone on a first date. It's like who in the hell is going to say yes? It's going to be a very, 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 very small percentage of very desperate people on that side, and the same thing on the buyer's side. It's going to be a very, very small percentage of desperate people who are like, yes, yes, I will talk to you. But for the most part, 99.9% of people are going to say, no, you're crazy. Why would you do that? So I love the analogy of, asking too many questions. I think you're so right. I always get really frustrated when I see so many form fields on a landing page. It just turns them away.
Doesn't work.
As long as we're talking on landing pages, because we're working on some landing pages for our clients, I'd love to get your thoughts on terms of what are some of the things that you have seen working in terms of conversions.
um Good question. There's a lot of elements that kind of go on a landing page that I find work really well. So, for example, I absolutely hate those really long scroll landing pages where it just takes forever and the offer keeps repeating itself and repeating itself.
Yeah.
It's truly annoying. I think the landing page needs to be highly targeted to whatever you're promoting. So, don't make a generic landing page for all of your offers. Be really specific on the offer, and if you can make it industry specific, and even using the ABM approach. We've even created landing pages for specific accounts. So say we're targeting, that specific account and these people in that specific account, and we want to send them something. We drive them to that landing page, which is built specifically with them in mind. And that I could say a few kind of elements that work well. For example, adding authority elements next to the form. So things like your Google rating or your case studies or customer success stories. Something that gives you authority or brands that you're partnered with. When you add that really close to the form field, I find the conversion rate goes up.
Hmm.
Um, there's other things as well, but I just get really highly targeted with it. I think treat it like you're writing a direct message or email to a specific person. Apply that same rule to your landing page. And if you're using the ABM approach, then you definitely should be using that. And I think what you'll find is that yes, it's less relevant to the majority of people, but it does create a higher conversion rate for that specific account that you're targeting.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I ran this test with the client recently because they were getting extremely low conversion rates. They were like basically nothing because they were going very broad in terms of the messaging that they were doing on LinkedIn ads as well as the landing pages. And I said, let's tighten that a bit. So I said, okay, who are you really selling to? Who's your current customers? And for them, it was listed companies in Singapore, certain persona, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like super finite. And they're like, I don't think it's going to work because it's too specific. I said, okay, just try it out. If it doesn't work, then well, chalk it up as a bad experiment. But within, I think, a month or so, like conversion rates jumped like over 101%. Like it was like a massive,
Wow.
massive jump. And they're like, why is that the case? We actually went super niche. But I said, look at the people who are engaging with it. Are they people you want to get in touch with? They said, yes. I said, because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, familiarity. If I see something for CFOs at, for example, Singapore listed companies, then for me, that's like, like that sounds like me if I'm that persona versus I think they're previously targeting like finance professionals or something like that. And it's like, yeah, you're going to get, it's just way, way, way too broad. You're not going to resonate with anyone. So I think to your point, even the landing pages being specific. And I really like that tip around social proof, but social proof or authority in the right place. So I hadn't thought about putting it near the form or the call to action, which I think is an interesting experiment because usually you have it buried somewhere at the bottom. It's like,
Bottom, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And no one scrolls that far.
exactly. You have the top of the page, you have like whatever the title is or whatever the brief synopsis, and then towards the bottom you have some. It's yeah, it's usually at the very bottom. You just scroll, and you see case studies like ratings.
Mm.
But I think it's a really, really good practical tip that I think people should experiment if they're watching, if they're listening, is to put, your whether you're featured in a specific publication or your ratings or reviews right near the form. Really, really good tip. I'm gonna have to try that myself, some clients, and see how it works. But
Let me know how it goes. But yeah, I've seen really good results from it. I highly recommend it.
awesome, awesome. I think definitely gonna try that out. Is there anything else that you've seen lately that's worked or not worked in the SaaS space?
um, I think, okay, so we touched on hyper personalization. That definitely is working. We touched on niching. That's really important. And I totally understand the pushback from clients. They're very scared to kind of, really drill down and focus because they're scared that they're, minimizing the fishing pool, so to speak. So, I totally get that. But yeah, you've seen results with it. I've seen results with it. It definitely works. I think another important element specifically for SaaS, other than the ones we touched on, have you had any kind of experience with chatbots or live chat functionality?
I have not personally. I know companies that have used it that have found quite good success from it. Um, but I think the caveat that I've heard is it takes a lot of time to set them up like properly because
Mm.
some chatbots you have to like manually you have to configure like the questions beforehand, and that takes up a chunk of time. But once again, I have not delved into it too much. I'd love to hear your experience with it.
Yeah, it can definitely be time consuming. Or so there's two kind of challenges with it. One, if you're using a person or your team, it's definitely time consuming for them.
Mm-hmm.
Two is if you're using a bot and they're just not quite getting it or answering the questions properly. So what I like to say to clients is like if we can just get a few people on the team on board just in the first kind of few weeks, just to see what are people really wanting to know. Why are they jumping off the website? Without, kind of buying or filling out the forms. And what we find is when people come on these websites, and I think you can kind of see with SaaS clients, they talk a lot about features. They don't kind of explain what the product does in a very simple way. So there's always clarity missing, even with the pricing models. But no one wants to call the number and speak to someone for half an hour. So they just jump off. It's just easier to jump off. But what we find if there was a live chat functionality there and they could just simply ask a question, they will use it. They will use it. And then it's
Mm-hmm.
really easy to kind of take this person's question, answer it and see if you can convert them. So I say use a person in the first few weeks. You'll naturally see a pattern of questions forming. And that gives you insight into, well, what is my website missing? Why did they keep asking these same questions? So either you can adjust your website to answer these questions, or you can create a bot that pretty much asks, is this your question? And a lot of times they can tick that, and then you can free up your staff to do other things. But that's another thing in SaaS that I find works incredibly well. And specifically in SaaS, because it can be a confusing product
Yeah.
that a lot of people have questions about.
Yeah, I know that's a really, really good point. Once again, something I never thought about is having a real person do a live chat for maybe the first couple of weeks, collecting the data and information in terms of what kind of questions they're asking, and then feeding that to a chat bot, an actual, robot who's doing it in the back end.
Automating it.
Yes. And I think the chat bots, I mean, I use them occasionally as well, particularly when I'm looking at tech vendors. And it goes back to what's the alternative? So the alternative, as you talked about, is I fill out a contact form. It's usually quite long. I have to schedule a time with a rep. It's once again, it's very cumbersome for me as a buyer versus if I can instantaneously get some kind of feedback or get one of my questions answered there, then your likelihood of leaving or bouncing is significantly lower. So I think it's a
Yeah.
really, really good tip. Just in terms of, because I don't have that much experience, in terms of budgets, what kind of budgets should tech companies be looking at, SaaS companies be looking at for, live chat or chat bots?
Yeah. Well, it's more of a time investment rather than a money investment, because you could get something like HubSpot Starter for, say, $75 a month. And that comes with live chat and chatbot functionality. So it's really just about your resources internally. Do I have someone that can be answering these questions for the first few weeks before we automate the process? So it's really just about investing that time as opposed to money.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, and thank you for sharing that. I'm sure Hub's probably very happy.
Thank
I'm
you.
actually interviewing them next week, their head of marketing, so I'll be sure to share these with him. But I think one thing that might be helpful, particularly if you are located in Asia, is leveraging like virtual assistants, which I'm sure might be the case for the live chats initially, because this is a frustration I have. I've been in touch with a couple of tech companies recently on some partnerships, and they're all based in the US. And obviously, the time zone here in Singapore, it's like their morning is my like middle of the night and stuff like that. So it's quite tough. There's a back and forth. But if there was someone who is even a virtual assistant who was doing like live chats, addressing some of those questions, um, it would cut down on some of the frustration and some of the time zone difficulties. So just a tip for some Asia-based or Australia-based companies who have operations here, who have clients here, might be something helpful for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a tool by a friend of mine, Terry Wilson, called Chatmetrics, and he actually uses, people that are kind of trained in how to answer questions around your business. So if you wanted to go down that route of using people at times that you know you're not going to be able to service your customers, do check it out.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll have to check that out. Well, Joanna, thank you so much. I always appreciate your time and catching up with you. And yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your insights on SaaS and lead generation. I guess the last question is, how can people get in touch with you to find out more about what you do?
Thank you for having me, and people can just find me on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn, so yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Joanna, thank you so much again. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
And if you're watching or listening and you know anyone in SaaS or lead generation, please do feel free to share this interview with them. A lot of really, really practical tips that they could experiment with today. So thank you so much again for listening. Hope everyone's staying safe. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah.